Folks, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Donald Halsing, and I'm the Associate Editor of Robotics 24/7. I'll be serving as the moderator today for our discussion called How to Scale Fleets of Mobile Robots. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for today's program, Advantech and Corporate Supply Chain Software. Before we start today's presentation, I'd like to go over some housekeeping for our audience members. If you have any questions you'd like to submit to our panelists for the question and answer portion of today's webinar, please submit them via the red Q&A box at the bottom of your window at any time. Any questions that aren't addressed in today's discussion will be answered following the program. If the slides accompanying today's presentation aren't advancing, please hit the F5 key to refresh your browser window. If you would like a copy, to download a PDF copy of today's slides and other supporting documents, you can do so by clicking the blue paperclip Resources button at the bottom of your browser. If you're still experiencing other technical difficulties with today's webinar, please click the orange question mark box at the bottom of your console for further help and instructions. The days of a mobile robot or two seem to be a thing of the past. As costs to own and operate mobile robots come down, companies have the option to control an entire fleet of robots under one roof or across multiple facilities. In today's program, we'll learn what areas mobile robots can best serve different businesses and how businesses can successfully manage several robots simultaneously to optimize their processes. To answer these questions and more, I'd now like to introduce our guests for today's program. Corey Leonard is Product Manager at Advantech, and John Sanagate is Senior Vice President, Robotics at Corporate Supply Chain Software. Corey, John, thank you so much for joining me today to discuss scaling mobile robots and fleet management. Now, at this time, I'd like to turn our presentation over to Corey Leonard of Advantech. Corey?
Hi, pleasure to meet you. My name is Corey Leonard. I'm a product manager here at Advantech, and I cover our application-focused embedded products. So that covers everything in mobile robots, some drones, and a couple of other products. But let's go ahead and get into the slides here for today. So if you're not familiar with who Advantech is, we were founded in 1983, so just been in business for a little over 40 years now. We're actually the world's largest IPC company at about 41% market share. So that brings us to about a total of 2022 revenue of about $2.31 billion. So we're very heavily plugged into the ecosystem and to the partners in the space. So we have very strong relationships with the key IC vendors, camera suppliers, memory suppliers, and everything that's necessary to bring a solution into the field and to market. We have 3 manufacturing sites that are all 100% owned by Advantech in Linkou, Taiwan, and Kunshan, China, and also in Nagoda, Japan. So because our ERP system is shared between all of those, we can also transfer our product production from one line to another, depending on particular constraints that maybe a region or a customer may have for tariffs, for national security, or any other purpose. And of course, we're about 8,900 total employees worldwide across all of our manufacturing, logistics, and sales centers. So as far as what we do in our application-focused embedded, so we focus on a couple of key areas. So renewable energy infrastructure, robots and AMR, smart agriculture, and drone. But today we'll be talking specifically about robot and AMR. So generally our approach for these markets is to listen to our customers and to see exactly what they're doing in the market and to help create products that enable that solutions and those services. So we take a consultative approach with our customers and we listen for what their needs and what their pain points are, and we develop our products specifically to address those. As I mentioned before, we're really plugged in with our ecosystem partners and with the industry. So we're very closely aligned with the market trends and with the new technologies that are coming out to better serve our customers and better serve their applications and industries. And of course, bundling all of those solutions, bringing in the ecosystem together from all of the peripherals, memory, solid state drives, cameras, wireless communications, and really anything that you need to build your mobile robot solution. Okay, so for robotics, so we focus heavily on x86 and ARM-based computing, so covering a really broad range of capabilities for AI, for vision solutions, for others. We're also very oriented towards AMR and the type of design considerations that those need. So a lot of isolated input-output. We're very high ESD protection, so either 8 kilovolts or 15 kilovolt for contact or air discharge. And of course, MIPI and GMSL inputs natively on the board to be able to take in those cameras without any kind of processing or latency penalty. We're also designing these to be really small and easy to integrate into AMRs with wide voltage input to accommodate a range of different possible power sources within your AMR. And of course, we focus heavily on enabling the software piece of this as well. Okay, and I won't spend too much time on this as well, but when customers work with Advantech, you know, of course, our focus is to help our customers enable their software applications, but we also do a lot in pre-trained models and some off-the-shelf type SDKs and APIs. So if you need some assistance to get your solution up and running, we also have the hardware there and the software as well. So that concludes my presentation, and turn it back to Don.
All right, thank you so much, Corey. And now we're going to turn the presentation over to John Sanicate of Körber Supply Chain Software. John, take it from here.
Thank you, Don, and nice to be here again with you today. Hi, everybody. My name is John Santigate. I'm the Senior Vice President of Robotics at Körber Supply Chain Software. And you know, a little bit about myself. I've spent the last 5+ years growing our mobile robotics specific business unit here at Körber Supply Chain Software. Prior to that, I'd been an industry analyst and spent many years evangelizing the benefits and value of autonomous mobility in the warehousing and supply chain execution markets, which brought me to the space that I am here today. Just for those of you that aren't familiar with Körber Supply Chain Software, we're primarily a software-driven organization. We focus on providing warehousing and distribution operations with an end-to-end suite of enabling software solutions. Right. So if you're familiar with warehouse management systems, that is our flagship product, our Körber Warehouse Advantage for the enterprise, and our Körber Edge product for our SMB customers, and our 3PL product. That obviously is the foundation of most warehouse execution solutions, but we're overall a team of individuals with a deep base of experience around material flows and processes in supply chain execution space. And so when we think about our suite of portfolios, again, from the software side of things, anything that ends in MS, we're WMS, labor management, LMS, transportation management, order management, freight audit, and pay. We actually recently had a substantial acquisition. We purchased one of the leading best-of-breed TMS organizations in MercuryGate. And so now when you think about where we're going as a supply chain execution software organization, we're taking our capabilities beyond the four walls of the warehouse and enabling effective transportation management solutions as well. But on top of that, we look at the enabling workflows and are also the world's leading provider of voice technologies, or integrator of voice technologies for the warehouse, as well as a leading integrator for autonomous mobile robotic solutions. So the team that I manage and work with is tasked with helping customers identify a best fit mobile robotic solution. We are not an OEM of mobile robotic technologies. We are a integrator reseller of a suite of various mobile robotic solution partners, or AMR solutions. So what we do is we take a very consultative approach, work with our customers to identify, you know, what their needs are, their constraints are, their objectives are, and so forth, and work to look across a broad range of mobile robotic solutions and help in a very consultative way identify what a best fit solution would be for a given organization, looking at the pros, the benefits, the value, the budget across a range of options. And then we go on to sell, deploy, deliver, and support those solutions for our customers. One thing that is quite unique about Körber Supply Chain Software is because we are a WMS company, we've taken the time to make proactive investments and intellectual property around the integration layers of mobile robotic solutions into WMS applications, and through that have been able to deliver far more rapid and more cost-effective implementations and integrations of mobile robotic technologies. Today, we're working with customers doing goods-to-person fulfillment with mobile racks, tote-to-person solutions, collaborative and aisle robotic solutions. We actually have a partner that does autonomous cycle counting for warehouses, as well as full pallet automation. So when you think of the broad opportunities of mobile robotic applications in the warehouse, we work with vendor partners that help us deliver and deploy a wide range. And I think there's a very particular question I know that Don and I will talk about here related to interoperability and tying systems together, which I think will be quite a interesting bit of conversation for this audience. With that, that's a bit of an introduction into Kerber supply chain, and I think I'll pass it back to Don to go ahead and get the party started.
All right. Thank you very much, John. And again, thank you, John and Corey, for joining me today for our roundtable webinar. Now we're going to dive deeper into the topics that our panelists have discussed in their introductions in the roundtable discussion portion of our program. As a reminder to our audience, you can submit a question for the question and answer segment of today's program via the red Q&A box at the bottom of your window at any time. Now, this first question is, I'm going to start with John on this one. The question is, what are some of the biggest challenges that end users should anticipate when it comes to scaling mobile robot usage? And that includes both scaling up usage and scaling down usage.
Yeah, thanks, Don. That's a very hot topic here these days. I think obviously as we head into peak fulfillment, the peak fulfillment season with a lot of our customers in the e-commerce order fulfillment market, scaling up and scaling down is something that happens on an annual basis. But not just that, right? You've got to deploy a system that is capable of scaling up and scaling down, right? The traditional approach to deploying, warehouse automation is, you build for the future. You look out 5 to 10 years, and you design a system that's capable of supplying the throughput of the building's planned demand over that time horizon. The challenge with that model here is that you're always underutilizing that system itself, right? Because you're planning for a period out into the time that supports growth. So up until that point in time, you're not fully utilizing that asset. And then once you hit that point in time that the system's built for, it's time to move on to the next system, move out of the building, because those sorts of systems aren't as flexible as mobile robotic type solutions. So that's one of the big benefits that's been seen in the market for AMRs and mobile robotic solutions, is the ability to scale them essentially on demand. So the idea of building for 5 to 10 years down the road now, we can build for this year, maybe a 2-year horizon, and incrementally add capacity to that system. So when you think about the challenges relating to scaling the system, there's 2 forms of scaling, right? Are you scaling for steady state growth? And you have to understand what that growth looks like. Or are you scaling for, intermittent demand, the peak season? Scaling for the intermittent demand, again, addresses a very common problem in the warehouse fulfillment space of getting peak volume through the facility within the existing architecture, right? And typically you throw a lot of people at that problem. And in today's market, that's a very scarce resource. With mobile robotic services, there's solutions out there where we're a supplier of such a solution of robot as a service, where you deploy a framework solution or a baseline fleet of robots designed for your peak weekly volume, right? Your peak average weekly volume, so you can support that volume. And then as you start to plan out for your upcoming peak, right, it's a series of collaborative conversations and modeling. And then we simply plan to send an additional set of robots to the facility to scale up for that point in time. And because the system's already established, typically what you do is you connect those robots to the same network as the existing fleet. And now you've just instantaneously increased capacity. Now, that doesn't solve the problem, right? Because typically this is done in collaborative environments. You still need to add human labor to really increase volume. The difference is, because you're adding robots, the volume of human labor is smaller than it would be if you were just throwing human beings at the problem. Now, the challenge is making sure you're efficiently planning, right? Making sure that you've got visibility into the demand and the data. And then the other part about scaling is that sort of full system scaling, right? And then there's also scaling down. But the full system scaling, right, is really a planning exercise. Again, traditional automation and encapsulated systems are not built for on-demand growth and scale. But with modern goods-to-person systems, with modern collaborative in-aisle robotic solutions, really these systems can be expanded, within a very short window of time just by determining, do you have the space allocated to expand the system, having the conversation with the supplier or your integrator of choice, and then going out there and putting the plan in place to bring some additional capacity into that system. Now, as far as scaling down at peak, it's, when you've got robot as a service, you box up the robots and you send them back at the end of the season, right? Again, it's a function of making sure you're through that peak, through your return season, that you don't need that capacity anymore. But oftentimes you can work with your suppliers to make that a bit of a painless experience, right? Maybe you want to keep 3 or 4 of them there. You think you're past it, but you're not quite sure. Work with the folks that you're partnered with to allow you to hang on to those there. Maybe you're not billed for them unless you put them into service. So, there's some challenges, but I think in today's market, they're rather minor, Don.
Yeah, all very good points. Thank you so much, John. And Corey, I'd like to ask you the same question, and if you could answer it from the Advantech side, what are some of the biggest challenges that end users should anticipate when it comes to scaling their mobile robot usage up and down?
Yeah, I would say John actually covered a lot of really what you're going to see in the market, or as far as the challenges of actually deploying in your solution. I think one thing I would also mention as well is just that when you actually go to deploy these, you also need to make sure that your infrastructure within your facilities is set up for being able to handle AMRs. So you may need to do some special arrangements for your aisles. You may need to set up special pathing. And of course, you may also need servers and additional wireless communications infrastructure within your facility to be able to manage that. And so, of course, you want to be able, like John said, you want to predict where you're going to be probably within 5 or even more years, and make sure that your capacity is ready to be able to handle that demand or that potential future demand later down the line. So,
yes, absolutely. And for this next question, Corey, I actually want to start with you on this one. How much data do vendors and integrators need to have in order to assist with scaling robot fleets, especially when we're talking about peak season and holiday season like we're entering into now?
Yeah, so that really depends on how your architecture works and how the robot pathing and everything is controlled. So obviously, if you're doing something over a cloud-based service with everything managed in a remote server somewhere else, that's going to have much higher bandwidth demands than something that's integrated on-prem. So a lot of our customer base, at least that we've seen so far, typically you're going to have an on-premises server, and that's going to communicate almost entirely over local area networks and through local wireless area networks as well. So for warehouses especially, so you probably already have a lot of this infrastructure. So a lot of companies may be using some electronic tools for managing warehouse, managing inventory, some tablets on their forklifts and stuff like that. So a lot of the infrastructure may already exist there and may already be capable of handling it. So the actual pathing for the robots and a lot of the functionality that the robots perform is actually going to be really on device. And then the commands that are going back and forth from the robot to the main server are really simple, small bits of data that aren't really too bandwidth heavy.
Yes, that's the power that you can get from edge computing. Now, John, I want to ask you the same question from an integrator side. How much data do integrators like Körber need in order to assist with scaling mobile robot fleets? Again, around peak periods, especially like we're entering into now.
Yeah, Sherry, I think Corey brought up a very great point, right? The availability of data today about warehouse operations is substantial, right? With the Internet of Things, the connected edge devices that are providing an abundance of data, there's a lot of availability there. However, when you're thinking about scaling up for peak, knowing that data in real time doesn't help you scale a robot fleet, right? You have visibility into what's happened in the past, and you've got a plan for what's happened in the future. That time layer is super valuable in terms of labor management and workflow orchestration and material flows at a point in time. But that point in time doesn't allow you to get equipment insight here as you need it, right? So as an integrator, what we look to do is understand, what was the peak last year? what's your current state demand profiles. And all that data is typically available in the WMS. And as a WMS provider, we're very adept at identifying and articulating exactly what it is that we need to pull. And in certain instances, with some customers owning that process on their behalf. But we're looking at, has the product mix changed? What's going out the door currently? What are some of those trends that are being planned for? But at the end of the day, the peak period is an effort in forecasting, is an effort in planning, right? If last year's peak was 20% above baseline, this year's baseline is 10% above last year's, and you're anticipating a similar growth, those are the sort of the things that we are looking at to help anticipate how much additional robot capacity we would need to bring into an operation. The data is relatively available around the history, right? The demand profiles, the mix, the commonality between different products that are ordered together, box sizes for capacity. Those things are all there within the WMS. So it's really an effort in mining the data that exists in a way that gives you, visibility into the past, and then, leveraging what you know about the market to model how the future needs to play out in order to order this stuff. Because we're forward ordering capacity about 60 days. So you want to be able to have those robots on site 30 days before your peak, so you're not scrambling at the last minute to really integrate them and stand things up.
Yes, exactly. Because it's not just about making sure that you have all your products in stock getting ordered and delivered, but also making sure that you have the infrastructure, and in our case, the robots, to handle that capacity. Thank you, John.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add again back to Corey's point of edge compute, right? The robots are edge devices as well, right? So there's a tremendous amount of data that's being collected that in the past you're not collecting, robot related mobile material flow related data in the process, and that becomes a data mining avenue for organizations that are already using that technology.
Yep. You can get very granular and very specific with that data, which can be helpful if you're able to interpret it. Yes. Thank you, John. Corey, this next question is going to be for you. And from a network perspective, how should organizations work with their internet providers in order to ramp up their network and their accessibility and availability in their warehouses? Would that be something that you'd want to turn to your network provider for, or would you want to turn to your robot vendor or integrator?
So, that's going to depend on really what kind of application that you're looking to do. So, within a warehouse type environment for like inventory management, and inventory flow, probably what you would do is just work with your internal IT department and just ensure that you have the Wi-Fi infrastructure within your building to be able to support the robots. So really within an indoor environment, as long as you have Wi-Fi functionality, that should cover the vast majority of use cases. And the robot should have the sensors and the communication equipment on board to be able to handle the rest. It gets a little bit more complicated when you start looking into like broader deployments. So let's say, for an example, we're doing like a robotic lawnmower, and you're going to have it go outside of buildings within a field and just kind of go through and make sure the grass is mowed autonomously. That may require a little bit more. So in those cases, we actually would suggest our customers use something like 5G or LTE services. And you may need to work with an internet service provider or a wireless provider, like the common 3 carriers within the United States, or potentially you could also operate a private WAN with 5G as well. We do have customers that exist in that space and work with that. But of course, it really depends on what kind of infrastructure exists within your environment as of today, where you're going to be using the robots, and how you're going to be using them. So hopefully that answers the question. I guess feel free to add into that if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that does a very good job of answering that question, because you're right. The answer is usually it depends. It depends greatly on if you're in a building or outside a building, because I've talked to autonomous mowing companies, and they ask those questions. Do I need a custom LAN? Do I need to go over 5G? Do I want to have both? So, right, those are the correct questions to be asking. Yeah. Now, as we continue our roundtable discussion, I want to take a moment to remind our audience that if you have any questions you'd like to submit to our panelists for the question and answer portion of today's program, you can do so by hitting the red Q&A box at the bottom of your window at any time. So this next question, I want to turn to you, John, first. So if an organization is looking to scale its mobile robot fleet across multiple locations, multiple warehouses or facilities, what do they need to know? What are some metrics or data points that would be helpful in order to facilitate that multi-location deployment?
Yeah, Don, that's a great question, right? I actually work with, and my team works with several customers that have gone through that process, right? Both with goods to person, mobile robotic technology, as well as collaborative and aisle robotic solutions. And, oftentimes what we see is you take the lesson learned from one site and roll it into the next. Each site, when you're talking about the same sort of solution, providing the same workflow, is an independent installation from the others. The value prop often comes from what do you learn during the integration process and the workflow definition, right? Early state in these projects, you're drawing what we call a blueprint, a solution blueprint. You're identifying, every touch point of technology in the process, every piece of workflow, every, API call, and then you're defining, where your charging stations are, where your pick stations are, where your drop-off location. You're defining all of this. Now, you can transfer that between sites, but each site isn't going to have the same charging locations, isn't going to have the same pickup and drop off. So a lot of that are the things that you're, kind of manipulating on a site by site basis. Those are more tactical decisions, right? The more strategic part of the process is on the front end, where you're talking about the data integration and how you're going to leverage that data to do your mobile robotic deployments and optimization. There are tools, when you do these systems, you do have dashboards that provide visibility into each individual site. But realistically, the solution is meant to be oftentimes a fulfillment execution tool, if it's used for that. If you're used for pallet replenishments and putaways, right, it's the same sort of scenario. Is you're providing that function for that facility, tying it into the WMS and operating as a function of the four walls within that building. Right, when you think back to more broad-based, conveyor and sortation type automation environments, you've got a WCS, right, the warehouse control system, which is meant to be the automation solution controls within the four walls of a building, right? When you're talking about expanding your fleet from one building to the next, right, you're taking that same perspective, is that the four walls in building 2 is a bespoke implementation, is a bespoke deployment. So oftentimes the carryover is, related to the data within the WMS, maybe the operational metrics, so you can track those and compare against facilities. But when you're going through that process, you often want to take the lessons learned on a first facility and determine, would I have done certain things differently? And can I transfer that knowledge as we go into another project? Less so about how do I tie these 2, 3, 4 buildings together digitally to create a mesh network of information about the operation. That likely already exists within the construct of the WMS and the order management solution. So a lot of it really is, thinking in the context of each site is going to be a standalone deployment with components that have value to other sites, but not necessarily a wholly integrated and orchestrated network per se.
Yes, absolutely. You raised some interesting questions here. And again, you can look at data from the perspective of how do I connect my data across my facilities? Because in some cases that is useful, but more so, how do I learn from my first deployment and learn from my second deployment and so on and so forth? How do I take that data and use it to make sure that what I'm setting up at a new facility is benefiting from what I've already done? Yeah, excellent points, John. Now, Corey, I want to ask you, same or similar question here. If a business is looking to scale its mobile robot fleet across multiple locations, what do they need to know? What data would make that easier? And, we can talk a little bit more about, do you want to connect your data or do you want to learn and grow?
Yeah, I will add, I do really agree with John that when you're going to scale across multiple locations, it's really difficult to find an actual one size fits all type solution, since every location is a little bit different. The robots are going to have a different location where they go to charge at night. The pathway that the robot follows through the warehouse may be entirely different depending on the location. So as far as scaling and covering multiple locations, you probably are going to be taking a kind of, per project approach for each of your buildings. So as far as scaling though goes, so the robots themselves, the software, the training, the know-how, that can all easily be applied across multiple locations. So if you have one technician, or if you have a group that's managing the deployment, as John mentioned, maybe they start off with one and kind of learn their lessons as far as, how it works integrating a robot within their particular organization or application. And then they can take that knowledge, that learning, and apply that to the rest of a company's locations.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Corey, I want to ask you another question as well, which is, how far ahead into the future should an organization plan if they want to scale the robot fleet? Are they looking at somewhere on the order of weeks or months or years? What sort of scope do you need to think about when you're planning? And are there multiple scopes that you need to think about?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on where you're starting from. So, I would definitely say you're looking on the order of more like months to maybe years for a lot of your planning. For certain types of applications, so let's say that you're building a new warehouse today. You're kind of starting from a clean sheet. You don't have anything existing. You can really take that, design it specifically for robots. So you can plan it with the charging locations in mind. You can plan it with the robot pathways in mind. And really set the stage for a fully automated type warehouse solution. On the other hand, if you already have existing warehouses, if you already have existing locations, the planning is a little bit, more rigid. So you're already going to be fixed as far as, where the location is of certain things, where you have access to power, network, and, et cetera. So that will kind of define things for you when you're starting with an existing location. So typically, if you are starting with an existing location, obviously, you're not going to be redoing a lot of, you're not going to be redoing a lot of work on the, the building and the planning. So you might actually just need to retrofit some things. So you might need to add an additional power drop, or you might need to get IT in to run a few more Wi-Fi access points. So if there's a location where people are not typically using devices, but a robot may pass and, possibly lose connection, that may be something that you want to take a look into. But I guess, John, do you have anything else to add from your side?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking, we talked a little bit about that prior, and I think you touched on some good points there, Corey, right? When we're looking at scaling, it's a question of, are we scaling for an immediate need, or are we scaling for future growth, right? And the time horizon varies. When you're talking about scaling for peak, right, you're within the 12-month window in which you're planning for that year's peak season, right? You're going to plan out. I mean, when you think about how retail organizations, e-commerce organizations, they turn out of peak season, in February after, during that end of the returns window, or March, and they're looking forward to the current year's peak sales season, right? So that happens pretty early on. I wouldn't say necessarily weeks. I think weeks is too short of a window, right? Scaling robotic fleets is more of a strategic endeavor, even if it is, we'll consider scaling for a peak season more tactical. If you do it right, you can shrink that window to, as I mentioned, as little as 60 days, but you don't want to go much more narrow than that. When you're talking about, we've got customers that we've worked with that, the first initial implementation was for one site with, 300 mobile robots. To expand out throughout a network that was 8 different sites. Site 1 ended up being that proof point, and it proved out. And now, so we've gone through that iteration of, when do we start the project? We started the planning for the future sites right at day 1, thinking through, if we've got success, here's our incremental path forward into the future for that particular customer. Not everybody thinks that way. Not every operation is equipped to do things in that manner, right? But when you're thinking about modernization and growth in today's environment, the more you can think strategically about the business and what you're going to need to do to keep up, the better off you are. And often, you think about strategic planning, you're doing that every year, right? And so you're going to plan every year's worth of execution. You're going to do certain things. You're not going to do other things, and you're going to, reconfigure the strategic plan on a periodic basis.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, of course, things that have to be considered when you're looking at, people are planning out, business leaders are planning out what they'd like to do into the future already. Adding in robots makes it a little bit more challenging or a little bit more complex, but ultimately it's still the same process. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for participating in the roundtable discussion portion of our program. Now we're going to move on to the audience Q&A portion of our event. And as a reminder to our audience members, you can type a question into the Ask a Question text area and then click the Submit button as it comes up in your browser window here. Due to time constraints and the large size of our audience, we may not be able to answer all questions during the broadcast. All right, now let's get started here with some questions from our audience. And I'd like to start with one for you, John. And the question is, with the growing adoption of automation in the supply chain, how do you see companies addressing the challenge of minimizing downtime while also balancing ROI in their automation investments?
Yeah, Don, I think that's a great question. Right? I think, again, I made the anecdote earlier about when you're building traditional approaches to automation, you're fixing things to the ground. You're clearing out space. You have the potential to take the facility down. And that's one of the things that you really need to be thinking about when you go into a discovery phase for if mobile robotic technology is a appropriate fit for an operation, right? Do you have space available? If you don't, can you take your operation or some portion of it and move it somewhere else or pause it for a period of time while you stand something up? That's not always the case though, right? Today with goods to person robotics, you do need floor space, right? Anything where you've got mobile robots that are moving equipment to a stationary period, you get tremendous velocity out of those solutions. However, you do need the space available. But there's also several options that exist today where you don't really take any downtime, right? Collaborative in-aisle robots are allowing organizations that are picking eaches and cases and showing them to deploy mobile robots into the existing infrastructure, right? Obviously there's things to consider. Are the aisles wide enough? Do you have at least 6-foot aisles? Are there cut throughs? You do some modeling there. But there's options today where, your ROI is generated in months based on a robot as a service model that allows you to make use of robots without taking your facility down and sort of, go through the process of, 2-3 months of the integration and the planning and then turn it on. Right. And that's a rather new approach to automation technology. Goods to person. Yeah, you do need to take stuff down. And how do you balance that? Well, that's on the front end of the operation. Are you going to take that piece of work that's being conducted within a piece of a facility and move it somewhere else? Do you have the space already available and you're not being disruptive? You've actually planned for this investment over time and now you've got the square footage available to install it. That we're finding more and more. And then the other piece of it is, are you talking about a greenfield build, in which case there's no downtime. You're building from the ground up and it's really more about getting that facility up as quickly as possible so you can start putting boxes in and taking boxes out, right? In those environments, the ROIs, it's a much broader conversation because you're talking leasing, construction, electrical, Wi-Fi, racking, everything. But when you're talking brownfield, yeah, you do need to have those considerations, but the implications can be quite minimal depending on the opportunity and the type of automation that could potentially be implemented. So, balancing it is really a function of understanding, do you need to move some aspect of the business somewhere else? Can you maintain continuity of that operation while you go through the process? And those are questions that really need to be tackled on a case-by-case basis.
Yep. Those are the big questions that you have to ask about ROI, because like you said, sometimes you have the space and sometimes you need to think about if I need to add space, in order to accommodate robots. Yes. Thank you, John. Corey, this next question is going to be for you. And the question from our audience member is, do you see a use case where voice would be beneficial for AMRs? using voice commands or voice controls in some capacity?
Yeah, so that's back to kind of the earlier theme of our discussion is it very much depends. So to give you an example, I'm working with a customer or who's doing a patrol robot. So it's a security or facility security oriented application. So the robot will just go around the facility. It has cameras to watch what's going on the facility. It has some, running some models for, like object detection and for some recognition. So just to identify if there's any possible threats or security issue on campus or in the facility. And so in those cases, you may actually have a voice in there for the robot to call out, hey, I see you're doing something I don't quite like, or I'm notifying the security for the building. And so, or you may even have it such that it's, if somebody walks up to it, it could offer directions to a particular location on a campus. So there are definitely use cases where voice makes a lot of sense in AMR technology.
Yes, absolutely. It's something that we've been seeing in security robots as they become more and more prevalent, is that they do have those voice capabilities to interact with members of the public or employees who encounter them for information sharing purposes. And John, I want to ask you the same question, because I know that Körber works in voice control a little bit. Do you see use cases where voice control would be beneficial for AMRs?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Corey, and Don and Corey. I think that's an interesting piece. Because I work in the warehouse space. I've been in the robot space, and 6 years ago I would have been thinking about all of these applications. But the security use case is one that I had written about quite substantially in the past, but wouldn't think of in today's context because I'm not living that on a day-to-day basis. But I love that application, right? Natural language interface with machine technology is something that I think is quite fascinating. In fact, many of the folks on the line here might have an Alexa or a Google Assistant or something of that nature, and you've got similar, AI-driven natural language connections to those technologies. When I think about voice, I think about the application of voice technology in the warehouse, right? So we've got let me take a step back. If you back up, 10 years ago, right? Mobile robots weren't really an option, right? Mobile robots there was Kiva, but they had been acquired by Amazon, and so you couldn't commercially acquire that technology. There was a couple others that were doing more point-to-point stuff, but in broad-based warehouse technology, the way in which we're using mobile robots today, it wasn't an option. The best option for productivity improvements was to leverage voice picking technology, and so there was a period of time where the investment into warehouse productivity improvement was into voice picking, like voice enabled picking, where the voice system tells you the location, the unit, and then you check digits and confirm audibly to give you a heads up, hands-free picking process. We do see a lot of that still in food and cold chain, where it's far more beneficial to operate using voice versus RF devices. Now, when you think about mobile robots, a lot of that is an evolution of the voice leverage technology. It's simplifying the process, leveraging the things that people are doing already today in their day-to-day business, and layering in another aspect of it. So voice would be, we're going to take the need to look at things and push buttons and create a natural language interface there. What we're seeing with robots today is it's very visually directed. You're going to see a unit, you're going to be shown a location, you're going to pick it, scan it, and qualify it all digitally. So it's almost a evolutionary step. There's a lot of the same sort of value drivers. Now, this is something that we've been working on at Körber, is the integration of those voice picking solutions into autonomous mobile robots, right? Because a lot of the mobile robot solutions today will have a human interface, a screen, right? A touch screen interface. But if you've got the voice solution and you can orchestrate the work without the screen, you might have an opportunity to look differently at how do you deploy mobile robots, right, into the operation. Because with voice, you're still moving around the facility in the same sort of up and down pattern that you typically would, going point to point, doing the work. With robots, you have a different way of doing that. You can change the way in which the human moves in the facility, because you decouple the movement of the products from the human operator, right? So now is there an opportunity? 100% there's an opportunity, especially in environments where you've deployed voice already, to bring in an integrator that has experience in voice and AMRs and ties those two technologies together to allow you to further enhance the productivity by now changing the movement patterns of the people while keeping the way in which they work static, meaning using the voice technology that they're already comfortable with.
Yeah, it works very good for person to goods picking operations where you already have people walking through the aisles and, interfacing with the robots as they move through or as they move with the robots. And it also works for goods to person picking where you have robots coming to a station or location. You have an employee who's standing there moving them along. That voice can help speed up the operations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. So, Corey, this next question is going to be for you, and it's a question about final mile delivery or last mile delivery robots. So these are, outdoor AMRs that move on sidewalks and in public spaces. Are you dealing with those kind of robots in terms of fleet management, where, say, a grocery store or a restaurant could buy those robots and utilize them to deliver products from their facilities? And why might someone choose a ground-based AMR over a drone for delivery?
Yeah, so while I can't speak too much to the fleet management side, as far as the actual like hardware for the physical last mile delivery robots, so when it comes to those last mile delivery robots, it really kind of depends on what you're looking to deliver. So, one of the biggest limitations you're going to find with drones is the weight. So drones can only really realistically carry a certain amount of weight. And of course, the more weight that you are carrying, the less range that drone actually has going back and forth. So that's something you do need to be really cautious of when you're looking at that aerial delivery. But if you're going to something ground-based, realistically, the power demand and the weight capacity and everything is identical no matter what you're doing. So it takes about the same amount of energy and the same amount of time to get from point A to point B, no matter how much weight is loaded on that device. So realistically for larger deliveries, or maybe for like food services or like food delivery, like a DoorDash type of scenario, that would be better served with an on-ground robot. But if you're doing something that's where you're carrying lighter material, drones actually do work really well. But they get a little bit more complicated because drones are able to move in not only an X and Y plane, but a Z plane as well, vertically up and down. And they do also need to be able to communicate with other drones and other devices, where they are, what altitude that they're flying at, their heading and direction. So they're a little bit more complicated in terms of the sensor suite that's required and the software that runs on them to manage their pathing and their flight path.
Yes, absolutely. You get all those complications when you have more than two axes, when you add a third axis in there for making sure that the drones are flying safe. And a lot of these drones for delivery, they have to be FAA certified because of the ways that they're flying and doing beyond visual line of sight flights from a facility, whether that be a fulfillment facility or a restaurant or a grocery store or whatever. Yeah, lots to consider. John, this next question is going to be for you. And in this discussion, we focus mainly on AMRs. Is there still a role for AGVs or automated guided vehicles in the warehouse? Or are AMRs replacing AGVs in the space, in your opinion?
Yeah, Don, that's a great question. I look at AMRs as a evolutionary step from AGVs, right? AGVs laid the groundwork for autonomous mobility in the warehouse. And when you look at some tools that will be considered AMRs, like an AMR is really, a robot that's unencumbered by physical infrastructure, right? They can navigate a facility without the need for physical guidance. The goods to person robots are often considered AMRs. They're omnidirectional AGVs, right? Especially the QR code robots that are operating in a fixed fleet. The thing that gives them some of the characteristics of an AMR would be their LiDAR recognition, their obstacle detection and avoidance, and those things that are meant to be leveraged in, multi-use environments. But you're still containing those robots into a field where they operate and human beings are not meant to be. The collaborative and robots, or you call them person to goods robots, those are true AMRs. They can navigate, they can change direction, they can make decisions in real time based on the current state of the space in which they're operating. AGVs are purely guided vehicles, whether it's wire guidance, electromagnetic guidance, things of that nature. And yeah, there's absolutely still a role for that technology. We actually do quite a bit with AGVs, or although what we're seeing is still an evolution in that space, right? From physical guidance to digital guidance. I like to consider them DGVs, or digitally guided vehicles. It hasn't taken off yet, maybe it will. But digitally guided vehicles where, for example, you use the tool to map the facility, then you create the guidance or the road or the travel paths in silica, in digital, and the robots stick to those paths, or the guided vehicles stick to those paths. So you still have the feature functionality and oftentimes bigger payload of a guided vehicle, right? Because several of the guided vehicles are either tuggers or fork vehicles. You give the capability of autonomous mobility without the requirement for rail guidance, wire guidance, electromagnetic guidance, etc. You're using digital guidance, but they still carry the characteristics of a guided vehicle, in that if there's an obstruction or it can't complete a task of work, it's gonna wait for a human to come intervene, right? The big difference between the two is the requirement for manual intervention when certain things are obstructing the path. Like someone puts a pallet down in the digital path of a DGV, AGV, it's not going to go past that pallet. It's going to wait for someone to come move it. Or, we work with a vendor that has hybrid vehicles that if the autonomous function is disabled for an obstruction, a human being can jump on there, manually move it, put it back on path, and hit go and convert it back to a fully autonomous vehicle. No, I think that, AMRs are not going to replace AGVs. They're used in today's environments largely in somewhat different circumstances to perform different functionalities and continue to expand upon the ecosystem and capabilities of autonomous mobility in the warehouse.
Yes, absolutely. AGVs are still out there, and depending on your application, it might be a better fit than an AMR. Thank you very much. Corey, I have another question for you. So when you're working with a prospective customer who's interested in robots and robotic technology, how do you uncover what they need in order to make it work and what they might be able to afford?
Yeah, so that really depends on what the application is. And so, first thing that we do is sit down with our customers and just ask them directly, what task specifically you're looking to automate. Are you looking to automate, moving pallets from one location to another, like from, receiving area to a long-term storage area? Do you need something that's just like moving stuff from like work in progress back to storage? Or do you need something that's going to be roaming around outside your facility? And then, of course, yes, the cost is something that's really important to discuss. Some customers may not have the funds available to actually dump into a full deployment. And so you might want to turn to what John mentioned earlier, the more robot as a service type vendors and suppliers who can typically supply those for a monthly payment rather than investing in the hardware all up front. When I look at, say that I'm discussing with a robot vendor or robot manufacturer, and we're looking from a computer side, I might ask them about what kind of pathing that they're doing. Is it going to be this sort of guided? You're going to use a program, or you're going to set up some barriers to have it guide, and you just need some basic sensors? Or there might be the more advanced autonomous solutions that are going to be building in like some GPU technology and performing some AI algorithms on the data that's coming in from the LiDAR, from sensors, from an IMU, and doing some sensor fusion and processing locally on the device. So it really does depend.
Yes, absolutely. And John, another question for you. What sort of strategy does Corbett have when you're managing AMRs from multiple vendors? And this is a question about interoperability. How do you simulate and how do you optimize your AMR fleet, perhaps, before you actually implement them in the facility?
Right. So that's a really exciting space, Don, right? There's been a lot of tools and discussion around the growth of heterogeneous mobile robotic solution fleets. And when you think about that, you even have to take the autonomous mobility out of it and say tool sets, right? People, manual tools, and then autonomous tools. And how do you get all of those things working together in concert, right? There's a software play there for sure. There's several organizations, Kerber included, that today are enabling that through off-the-shelf solutions, off-the-shelf integration tools that are designed for workflow orchestration. And then there's the bespoke direct integrations where you sort of take on a project to do things. There's a lot more on the latter in today's market, although you do have integration tools that are designed specifically for that purpose. The bigger question is, right, how quickly are we really going to get to the point where you've got vendor A, vendor B, vendor C doing different things in the warehouse? It's actually rather rare today, right, where you've got a need for a handoff. I can tell you we're working on several projects where we do have two robotic solution vendors providing different pieces of the same process and interchanging material from one to the other. And we're doing that through, we're considering the evolution of the unified control system where you've got workflow orchestration, material orchestration, and the integration to the master, the WMS, all in a common layer to really provide that feature. That's pioneering stuff, right? That's newer. That's a relatively newer need, because where we are today in terms of market growth, adoption, and acceptance, many of the folks that have deployed a robot aren't to the stage where they've got the need for two different automation solutions to interface. You do have some where you might have a sortation robot, for example, with a convey top that's interfacing to the PLC of a conveyor, right? That's pretty basic stuff. We can do that, kind of all day long. In fact, we've done it for a customer that had an auto store installation and needed to automate the takeaway from the knuckle conveyor out to outbound. That's all basic integration components. The bigger value proposition is workflow orchestration and data-driven automation and tying it all together, which, there's several folks out in the market today with tools that do pieces of it. And there's several companies, as I mentioned, Kerber involved, that are working on the broader picture. How do you really create an orchestration enablement layer designed just for that purpose? So I know that was a long-winded way of saying it depends. Right? There's still a lot going on in that space. There's a lot of upside there, though.
Yes, absolutely. The case is usually that it depends, and this is why it's important to choose an integrator who can work with you to make sure that your deployment goes smoothly and successfully when you're introducing or expanding and scaling robots in your facility or across your facilities. Now, unfortunately, we've run out of time for today's program. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining me. As a reminder to our audience as we wrap up, a PDF copy of the presentations and other related content can be found in the resources box in the console. At this time, we ask you to please fill out the feedback survey that's now open on the console. Thank you in advance for filling out the feedback survey. Your participation allows us to improve future webinars and events. Thank you for attending today's Robotics 24/7 webinar, How to Scale Fleets of Mobile Robots. I'd like to thank again our sponsors for today's webinar, Advantech and Kerber Supply Chain Software. Shortly after the live event concludes, we'll send you an email so you can access this presentation on demand. On behalf of our guests, Corey Leonard of Advantech and John Sandgate of Kerber Supply Chain Software, my name is Donald Halsing, and I'm the Associate Editor of Robotics 24/7. Thank you again for tuning in to today's discussion. We hope you join us for our next program soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.